Hello, my name is Donald Lewis, and I'm back with another installment in the Iowa Vegetable Production and Management series. This time we're going to talk about Japanese beetles. Japanese beetle is a fairly well-known pest, one that is fairly easy to identify, and we'll go through a little bit of the information that we have about how that relates to Iowa vegetable producers. The Japanese beetle is easy to identify. It's about a ½ inch long, just actually slightly less than ½ inch, has shiny green head and thorax, the coppery reddish brown wing covers, and then it has those 5 tufts of white hair sticking out along the outside edge of the abdomen. There are other brightly colored beetles. There are some others with this size and shape, but none with this exact combination of shiny green, coppery brown, and the 5 tufts of hair sticking out the side. Just to be clear, I am talking about the Japanese beetle that feeds on foliage, flowers, and fruits of almost every kind of plant you can name. We occasionally still have confusion with another insect of similar name, but totally unrelated, and that is the multicolored Asian lady beetle. This is the lady beetle that feeds in trees and fields and gardens through the summer, and then in the fall of the year often invades the house in a behavior similar to a box elder bug. There's nothing to connect these two other than the similar sounding name that to some Iowans apparently Asian and Japanese sound like the same thing, but they're not the same beetle at all, so we'll work hard to keep those straight. Here's the life cycle of the Japanese beetle laid out in a chart. The eggs are laid in the middle of the summer. Larvae appear in August, and they are there in the soil until the following spring. Then in the springtime, they change into the pupa, and the adults emerge beginning in about the 4th of July, and adults will be present for about a 6-week period, most of July on into August, and a few may even last into September. Here it is in a different chart form showing how that relates to the summertime, that right in the middle of the winter, the grubs are very deep in the soil. They can be 4 to 6 inches deep, but then they come to the surface in May or June and they form that pupa. The beetles then are flying in July and August to lay eggs back into the sod. Beetles don't lay eggs in tilled soil. They only lay their eggs in sod. And then those larvae start to feed on grass roots or the roots of other plants, and they grow through August and September, and by October, they're fully grown at about 1 inch in length, C-shape, typical brown head, and then they're moving more deeply into the soil. So 1 generation per year. It takes 1 whole year to complete 1 life cycle of egg, larva, pupa, and adult, with the adults present and damaging crops in the middle of the summer, and the larvae feeding on roots in the later part of the summer on into early fall. As I said, the Japanese beetle adult feeds on the foliage, flowers, and fruits of about every plant you can name. 350 to 400 different plants have been recorded to host the Japanese beetle adult. And then the larvae feed on the roots of grasses, ornamentals, occasionally on vegetables and other other crops as well. But usually it's the adult stage that we're most concerned about controlling in vegetable production. In vegetables, the Japanese beetles have favorites, but eventually they may get onto everything. They're common on asparagus and beans and eggplants. They'll feed on all the succulent herbs, on the foliage of okra, potatoes, and others. On sweet corn, they're more likely to be on the silks than they are on the leaves. Now, feeding on silks of sweet corn is not an issue if pollination has already occurred, but if the corn has not pollinated and the beetles are feeding on the silks, then you're not going to get a full set of kernels on those ears. That's just the start of the list of the crops that the beetles may feed on, and it can go on from there, and you may have a favorite that's different than the ones on the list here. In fruit production, they also feed on the foliage, flowers, and fruits of apples and peaches and raspberries and aronia berries, so they are an equal opportunity offender. They will be found on lots of different crops, causing lots of different feeding damage to the foliage, flowers, and fruits. Aronia is one of those things that we thought might escape pest damage, but no. Here's a picture of Japanese beetles feeding on the foliage and a little bit onto the fruits of aronia berries in the middle of the summer. So it appears that almost every crop sooner or later can have its Japanese beetle time with the adult damage. Japanese beetle was found in the United States back in 1916 in Rhode Island, and it has dispersed from there. We did not find Japanese beetles in Iowa until 1994 when they appeared in Davenport, and since then we have recorded their presence in 71 different counties. Now that doesn't mean the other counties don't have Japanese beetle, it just means it hasn't been reported to us. So if you're watching this and live in a county that's not yet colored on this map, please let me know and we'll update the map. Also, just because a Japanese beetle was found within a county doesn't mean it's everywhere in that county. There can be areas within counties that have not seen it yet. There are areas within counties that have had the incredible outbreak that is typical of Japanese beetle, followed by the moderation. So different locations within the county can have different impact from the Japanese beetle. What can we do for control of Japanese beetle? Well, if it were beans or corn silks that have already pollinated, we might just tolerate the damage. Beans can withstand a lot of defoliation before the yield is affected. So one of the things you might do is consider how much damage is there compared to the cost of treatment and decide to tolerate. Screening is one way that is used to control Japanese beetle. The floating row covers can be used if that works for you. If it's a netting, it has to be a very fine netting. Remember, these beetles are a ½ inch long. They're about a ¼ inch wide and almost that tall. So the screening has to be less than ¼ inch spacing in order to keep the Japanese beetles away. Hand picking is probably not effective in the vegetable production, but that's what we tell home gardeners. If you have just a few plants and a few Japanese beetles, you may keep ahead of them by hand picking. Chemical control is not easy, and it's not one and done. If you're going to use insecticides for the control of Japanese beetles, you're going to have to spray early, and you're going to have to spray often. And the reason you spray often is because the Japanese beetles appear over an extended period of time. Each Japanese beetle adult may only live for 2 weeks, but the adults are present for 6 to 8 weeks because more keep coming out. There's a few that start at the beginning of July. There's a few that are still emerging in the end of August, but it's not that the beetles lasted that long, it's the emergence extended over that period of time. So in most cases, we're likely to need 2 to 4 insecticide applications through that period to eliminate feeding damage. Now, maybe you don't have to eliminate feeding damage, maybe just reducing it will be adequate. In that regard, there are a couple of insecticides on our list that are repellent to Japanese beetle. One of those is the kale and clay, sold as the trade name Surround. Azadirachtin is a neem oil or a neem spray that also deters Japanese beetles without killing them. Otherwise, almost all of our registered labeled insecticides will control the Japanese beetle. It's just a matter of applying them thoroughly enough and often enough to make the difference. Trapping Japanese beetles during an outbreak is like bailing the ocean with a bucket. You can catch thousands and thousands of Japanese beetles in your trap, but it makes no difference to the population in the county or the population on your farm. It's emotionally satisfying to catch a lot of beetles because you've got something to show for your efforts. You got a lot of dead, stinking beetles, but you haven't really changed the whole picture. If you do use a Japanese beetle trap, always place it far away from the crop you're trying to protect, because the Japanese beetle traps will attract more beetles than they catch, and you can actually increase the damage by putting a Japanese beetle trap in the crop where you're trying to use it. So we don't recommend these, but you know they're available if you want to try them. Again, just make sure you put it far away from what you're trying to protect. Controlling Japanese beetle grubs down in the turf, down in the sod, will not prevent damage to the crops the following year. This is something that comes up quite a bit when we see Japanese beetles feeding on ornamental trees like linden trees and flowering crab apples. People get the urge to kill the grubs, saying that will protect my tree. Because Japanese beetles are highly mobile and may fly miles during their adult stage, killing the grubs in the soil that you control will not make any difference. Similarly, we tell turfgrass operators that controlling the Japanese beetle adult will not protect turfgrass. So if you're trying to protect turfgrass, we treat the turf. If you're trying to protect trees and shrubs and vegetable crops, you spray the crops when and where the adults appear. There are several biological controls that are attempted for Japanese beetles. We have pathogens, nematodes, and parasitoids. None of these seem to make a big, lasting difference. They're out there, people try them, people swear by them, but when we get right down to looking at what's happening with the Japanese beetle population, we can't tell that these really solve your problem, with the possibility of one brand new exception. The nematodes that were sold for grub control never really caught on. Their efficacy was debatable because they're so expensive. It's really not a good way to protect turfgrass from damage. The white grub biological control called milky spore, it's a bacterium with the name Pinobacillus papilii, is only effective against Japanese beetle white grubs, not the other species of white grubs we have within the state. And there are so many testimonials about this on the internet that I put down milky spore and my Japanese beetle problem miraculously disappeared. None of those are controlled experiments, and even going back into the 1940s and 50s when this product was first available, it wasn't consistent. That sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, and there was very little to recommend it until the non-chemical controls became popular, and now there are believers who want to think this is the easy answer to their Japanese beetle control problems, but it's not. And remember, even controlling the grubs isn't going to solve the problem on the crops the following year. Finally, there is one new pest biological control for Japanese beetle. It's Bacillus thuringiensis Galleria. And Galleria is a different strain of the Bt bacterium that you know for controlling caterpillars, mosquito larvae, and others. This is sold as Grub Gone for treating the larvae with fairly good results. Putting down this bacterium on the soil, watering it in, will control the Japanese beetle grubs. But then the same material, BTG, Bacillus thuringiensis Galleria, is sold under the trade name Beetle Gone TLC for control of the adults. This is unusual for a BT to control both stages in the life cycle of an insect, but research done mostly at the University of Maryland by Stanton Gill and others have found that it does seem to control the Japanese beetle adults. The UC Davis research found that it may have a wider effect than what we thought, and so they used the common statement to avoid treating flowering plants, and that would apply to this organic biological control as well. The downside of BTG is about $180 for 5 pounds of product will cover 2 acres. And if you have to spray many times during the year, that's really going to add up to a very expensive treatment for eliminating the Japanese beetles off the plant. Well, Japanese beetle is well known. We've covered its life cycle. We talked about the damage that it causes in the adult stage on all kinds of plants, trees, shrubs, vegetables, and fruits. There are spray options available that have to be applied repeatedly. And one new product that you might consider is BTG for control of Japanese beetle in the vegetable production. Unfortunately, there are still no easy answers. but we're all in this together. So hang on, hang in there.